Today on the Cameron Journal podcast, I'm joined by Cinda Gault. She is an author of historic fiction, which we love here. She has three novels out: Everything I Hope For, A Small Compass, and This Godforsaken Place, which is what my grandma used to refer to Arkansas growing up, which I think is fun. That was her enthusiasm for living there. And we're going to find out all about her career, her writing style, her writing process, and more about these books. So welcome, Cinda, to the Cameron Journal podcast.
Thank you. I'm pleased to be here.
Yeah, so why don't we begin from the beginning? Tell us a little about yourself and your work.
Well, I am a writer, as you said, of historical fiction, as well as other genres, but my last three novels have been historical fiction. And the first two, well, all three of them are set in Canada. And the first two were set in the 19th century, and the most recent one was set in the 1970s. And as I look back over my work, I realize that there's a theme running through them. Each of the novels that I do, and it's a story of a woman who insists on having her adventures, no matter what the obstacles or the limitations of her times are. So that seems to be the kind of story I like to write, no matter what time period it's set in.
Absolutely. Yes. Well, the one thing I did not mention is the tenacious women angle of your historic fiction, which is a very important part. Um, this question is going to seem obvious, but I know you have a great answer for it. Why write about these tenacious women who are determined to do what they want to do?
I guess it's something that I respect and something I find inspiring. So often we are told that we are limited by our environment and that there are only certain things we can and cannot do. And yet I find over and over evidence of women who have just not done that. They have managed, no matter what the circumstances, to figure out how to navigate a meaningful life in those times, in harsh circumstances and otherwise.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's getting into that when you're doing your research, walk us through that process. What are you looking for? What's inspiring you? How do you get into all that? That's my favorite part of doing historic fiction.
Yes,
So I'm
yes.
always curious as to what other people do.
Yes, and it's the first two novels were set in the 19th century, so obviously I didn't live through those times, so I had to get to them through research. But the
Hmm.
one in the 1970s I did live through, and apparently a novel is called historical novel if it's set in a time more than 50 years ago. So I'm walking, talking historical at this point in my life. But to give you a
I
little,
know I have a book coming out that starts in 1954, and I was billing it as contemporary adult fiction, and someone said that's really a
no,
historical novel now, and I'm kind of like, has it
yeah,
been that? I'm like,
yeah,
it's like my mother's only in her late 60s. Like,
yeah,
and then
yeah.
it's like at this rate, I'll be historic in 12, and like I'm 37, I'm going to be historic in 13 years.
It
That's
comes really fast.
it
It
does faster
does,
than you
yeah.
think. Yes, yes.
Well, I'll give you a little bit of the flavor of doing the research for the novel A Small Compass. I
Mm.
discovered this story while I was actually researching for the previous novel, This Godforsaken Place. And I was reading a journal of a fur trader who was in charge of a fur trading post in Pembina. That was in Canada at the time, but it's in North Dakota now because they changed the border
Order.
with the Jay Treaty. Yeah. And I noticed at the bottom, it was much earlier in time than the one I was writing at the time. This was going back to 1806. And there was a little asterisk. And at the bottom of the page, it said, "A surprising thing happened tonight." An Orkney lad, and what he was referring to with Orkney lad was that the Hudson's Bay Company hired all of its employees from Orkney, Scotland, because apparently they were much more complacent young men than their British counterparts were. So they were well-behaved farmers, and that's where they like to bring them in to do their work in the fur trading company. Anyway, he said an Orkney lad asked if he could go and warm himself on the hearth for a while. And I said, yes, but I'm going to bed, so do what you want. And then a few minutes later, someone came back and told me that he was asking for my attention quickly. And I went down and discovered he was in the throes of childbirth. So I thought, oh my God, there's a story just waiting to be told. And I
Hmm.
had to know who she was and what had happened to her. And I discovered that she was called Isabel Gunn. And I thought, oh my God, that's a story. I have to tell it. And I found out that another writer had beaten me to it and written a story about her. And I went and read the book, and I was so surprised at how differently that writer had seen this person compared to the way that I had seen her. So it just shows you what can and can't be handed down through history. I mean, we can have dates and places and certain records of things people have done, but their hopes, their dreams, their character, their secrets, they're all those sorts of things. It's what you have to breathe that into the facts as a writer. So I went and learned more about her, and she was a 26-year-old in Orkney at the time, and she they called Orkney the island of women at the time because all the men were gone. They were either off working in North America in the fur trade, or they were pressed into fighting against Napoleon at the time. So she had ahead of her a life of just taking care of the farm with all the other women in Orkney. She had never had to have her own family. She'd never have her own life beyond that. So she cut her hair and disguised herself as a man and got hired on to the Hudson's Bay ship and came over here and worked in the fur trade successfully for 18 months until she found herself on the hearth having a baby.
Hmm.
And when I was doing the research for that, I found in the archives, the Hudson's Bay archives in Winnipeg, the Brits keep wonderful records. I got the actual captain's manifest for the voyage over. So I saw they had beautiful calligraphy back then, and I saw the list of employees. He wrote out all of their names, and so when he said John Fubister, I knew that that was Isabel Gunn. He didn't know it when he was writing it, but I knew. That sort of thing gives me the chills when I see something historical like that. So
Yeah.
I knew everything that happened on that ship, every day, what all the employees were doing, what the weather was like, everything that happened. And then they got to the actual post. And I went to the archives because I wanted to see where she was when she got pregnant. I could count back from when she was on that hearth, but I didn't know where she was. She could have been on the river system delivering provisions to different fur trading posts or that sort of thing. But she was at Fort Albany when she got pregnant. So those are the sorts of enjoyments of writing historical fiction, that you can dive in and find records, archival records, and you're actually seeing documents that were created by people who were living through it.
No, I love that as well. During my MFA program, I wanted to work on a book that I called Downton Abbey set in the antebellum South. And so one of the things I did is I read the Works Project Administration in the 1930s did a series where they went around the South and they recorded the life stories of the people who came off the plantation during the Civil War, the people who are free. Now everybody's in their 70s, and even the children at this point are in late in life sort of thing. And someone in Washington said we really should write all this stuff down before all these people go. And so they sent people out to do that sort of thing. And this is the same time Zora Neale Hurston is talking to Kasula, the last man who came in on a slave ship, all this sort of thing. And it is absolutely magical. To think about that. And to have the impact of hearing those voices. And the wonderful thing about those particular writings is they did not correct the English grammar. They took the time to write it like they spoke. So although we do not have audio recordings, the equipment was too expensive and hard to transport at the time, we have a flavor of how they spoke because they transcribed that patina. So as you read different states, different story, you can hear accents move and change, and there's that life that's still there. That gets me excited too. Like
Yeah.
that's one where I could sit down. They came in these big white books printed by the government, and I would sit down. On the couch. I'd read a whole one in one go. I'd be up till 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. I mean, it was just absolutely insane. No, that's always a magical moment. And I can just imagine reading that ship's captain's log and being like, that person you wouldn't have known.
That's right.
But
That's
this
right.
person's not exactly who they represented themselves to be. Um, Absolutely
But you feel
fascinating.
that you're there living it through with them,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
like a movie in your head. You're on their shoulder watching everything that's happening.
And that's my personal writing. So I always look at it, I like to write in such a way that it's almost like you're standing in a small shadowy corner watching the whole drama go on. Like I like to get that close to it. So
Yeah.
that's quite impressive. So yeah, and what a fascinating, odd story, and not a time period that a lot's been written about, you know.
No, and what I learned, I was all set on writing the story just about her.
Yeah.
And then I discovered that there was another woman out there at the same time, and her name
Hmm.
was Marie-Anne Gabry, and she started from Masquinongé, Quebec. And she was also 26, and she was determined she was never going to marry a farmer. She did not want to be a farmer's wife. So she was 26 and apparently, from all accounts, drop dead gorgeous and unmarried. And a Coureur de Bois blew into town with his sexy leather jacket and fringes and swept her off her feet. He had just come in from the West, and he had planned with his 7 years' pay to buy a farm. But he didn't realize that while he had been gone, there was a war with Napoleon, and wood had become so lucrative to sell that nobody was selling farms. So he had to go back out west again. By that time, they had gotten married. She was probably pregnant. And she said to him, "If you don't take me, you'll never see me again. You'll never see your kid again. This is, this is a non-negotiable." So she became the first passenger in the canoes that the voyageurs paddled out 1,800 miles out to the northwest as well.
Hmm.
And I discovered that Marie-Anne Gabry and Isabel Gunn were in the same place, being Pembina. Isabel Gunn worked for the Hudson's Bay Company, and Marie-Anne Gabry's husband worked for the Northwest Company, which was just over the Pembina River, and it was run by that guy, that fur trader who wrote the journal where I learned about Isabel Gunn.
Hmm.
And they were spitting distance from each other. And apparently, they had their babies there within a week of each other. And they were the first two non-Indigenous women to ever go out to the Canadian wilderness. And
Oh, wow.
there is no record of them ever having met. So they
Well,
meet and
thanks to the
hijinks
magic
ensue.
of fiction and Cinda Gault, they're gonna meet now.
That's right. Yes. And as they say in the business, hijinks ensue.
Yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. No, that's genuinely exciting. I did a writing residency with the University of Lethbridge in Alberta in a very small town on the basically a breath on the border between Alberta and British Columbia. Sneeze in that
Yeah.
town and you change provinces.
Right.
Um and the ruggedness of that wilderness is, I mean, I'm from Colorado anyway. I'm used to the ruggedness of the western part of North America,
Right.
which my friend, I live in the east now, and my friends in the east don't understand it. And I said, I just have to take you. We just have to go, like sort of, sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And and that but all, and it's not that populated now, but to
No.
think even back that there was just, bands of indigenous people, what their villages developments such as they were, and then trees
Yeah.
and rivers and
Yeah.
ecosystem, and that was it.
I
And
went out there on a road trip because I
yeah,
wanted to go and see where it was. So I went to Pembina, and just inside the border in North Dakota, there's a North Dakota museum or state museum.
yeah,
So we went in and talked to a very lovely man there who is the director, and I told him what I was looking for, and could he please direct me to where I could find the mighty Red River and the Pembina River where they intersected, because I knew from my research that's where the two posts were. And
yeah,
he said, "Oh, you're never going to find this on your own." So he hopped in the van with us and took us down to where it was and showed us which side which post was on. I never would have found that without him. And there
right,
isn't a stick left of anything. You would never
no,
know anything had been there. But all of this story happened right there with no, time really does, do the Ozymandias thing and covers
yeah,
everything up.
no, it's quite, and it's even just amazing. I was very lucky. The plantation that I used for sweetgrass, it was the plantation my family came from. It's still there. It's now a museum called
Mm.
Bowling Green in central Mississippi, owned by a name Edward R. McGee. We took the last name and moved to Alabama. We've been since Reconstruction. And we got to Tuscaloosa, said that's far enough, and set up shop. And And it was really cool to have the reference pictures that you didn't have. I kind of took the house in a different direction and kind of made it its own unique thing, but it was really cool to be able to explore that website, learn about, the guy who had owned us and all this sort of thing. I have not gone. My father went, so he had his own pictures he sent me because he actually has gone. I did not go, but it was quite nice. But even just in your head as you're writing, to have that, that land, that place, that energy, that space, and to lovingly recreate this world for us
Mm-hmm.
is must be absolutely magical, though.
Yes, yes, it is.
Yeah.
It's just you have moments where you gasp when you learn something or something clicks together, and even in my novel before that, I started by researching the Jesse James gang
Mm.
because I had just finished two very long projects. One was my PhD. It took me a long time to do that, and I was bringing up two boys at the same time during
Oh
that time.
my. What
So
a
it
yes.
took a long time, and then finally they mercifully went off to university, and I defended my thesis, and I was teaching, but I was as free as I had been for many years. So I
Right.
just felt like galloping over the plains with the wind in my hair, doing, just feeling free. So I thought, well, I'll start researching the Jesse James gang because they rode horses and they could do whatever they wanted. And as I
Yes.
was researching them, I was realizing how close American history was to Canadian history because at the time that Jesse James was doing, they were doing all of their stuff.
Hmm.
Just over the border was the Louis Riel Rebellion going on.
Yeah.
And as I
I've
learned,
just heard about this
have you?
recently. Here's how behind I am on Canadian history. When I did that writing residency, I had gotten heard, and the town I'd been in had a terrible rock slide that killed a lot of people, and I really had not realized the same thing, how very similar the history of Western Canada is very similar to the history of in the Western United States sort of thing. So
Yeah.
I'm excited to say more because I'm so excited now. I've just found out about this.
Okay, well, that was sort of the beginning thread of me putting together that story,
Yeah.
and I used a fictional character. Who was a 22-year-old immigrant from England, and she and her father came to Northwestern Ontario after the mother died, and she had said that she regretted not living life she said, I lived my life in a very small compass. And that's where I got the title for the next book. She
Perfect.
said, I've never been beyond my back gate, and I wish I had, been more adventurous. So after she dies, her daughter uses that as a jumping off point. And she and her father go to Northwestern Ontario. I know the landscape because it's where my husband is from in Wabigoon, Ontario.
Mm.
And as soon as they get there, he falls ill with consumption. So she's thinking, oh my God, I'm going to be stuck here alone. And the store owner was expressing way more attention than she wanted.
Mm.
And she just felt trapped. So she buys a rifle and starts just practicing shooting as a way of just feeling like she can do something. And when she's out in her back, very rocky 40, she stumbles over a wounded Jesse James gang member. And as she's bending over to find out who he is, she gets shot at from behind. She wheels around with the rifle and shoots dead the Pinkerton cop that was tracking him. So she has a big problem on her hands. And that will launch her on her epic journey that she will go on her own. Now, I got that far in the story, and then I had to figure out where I was going to take her. There are a couple of historical people that I was quite fascinated with, and one was Gabriel Dumont. I don't know if that rings a bell for you, but he was the military general for Louis Riel.
Mm.
And I found him a very interesting character because, by all accounts, he was a brilliant tactician. And if he had been allowed to just go ahead and do all the things that he had planned to do, they very well could have won that rebellion. But Louis Riel kept saying to him, God's told me he doesn't want you to do it. And Dumont stood back and allowed himself to be governed by that, which I thought was kind of an interesting contradiction in a military man. You would think that he would be more insistent on doing the thing that would work.
Right.
So he was one person I was interested in, and then the other person was Annie Oakley, because
Mm.
she was kind of the Wayne Gretzky of her time with a rifle instead of a hockey stick. She was just so much
Yeah.
better than anybody else was. And as I was researching them, I discovered that they both, during this period, wound up at the Bill Cody Wild West show in New York. And so there I had a destination for my fictional character, and
Yeah.
they all met up there, and again hijinks ensued.
Yes.
But the day that I discovered that those two people were together at the same place, it was just something just clanged together, and
Yeah.
all of a sudden I had the structure of my story.
No, no. I was had the privilege during the pandemic. I spent the first 6 months of 2020, the first 6 months of the pandemic, March to September, traveling around the country, 8,850 miles in 24 states in 6 months. And
During COVID, that was an odd thing to be doing.
yeah, well, what had happened is I had been living with my ex-girlfriend. We broke up the first weekend in March. I had gone over to this Airbnb to kind of figure out what my next move was because she didn't really have anywhere else to go, and I wasn't going to stay. And and so I left and I was trying to figure out kind of what that would look like and all this sort of thing. And then the world shut down. I was in the middle of releasing my short story collection. I just gotten a major journal publishing, all this type of thing. And then the world shut down. Everyone's like, shelter in place, shelter in place. I'm like, I don't have anywhere to shelter in place. So I'm figuring all that out. I go out to Denver, hang out with the parents for a little bit, eventually have to come back to the East, and did a bunch of stuff and ended up back out in Seattle. But one of the places I stayed while I was in the East was this lovely antebellum mansion overlooking a river in Virginia, somewhat near Charlottesville. And that was that whole, that lifestyle, that rhythm, that getting to see a lot of the dilapidated buildings that were still there but falling apart and all this type of thing was what got me into the Sweetgrass Saga. So I totally get where you're coming from in terms of, finding the stuff and being like, yeah, there's a story here to be told sort of thing.
That was a
Um,
lot of different landscape you covered in 6 months.
it was. I went as far north as Massachusetts and Pittsfield. I went as far south as about Tennessee. I spent a little bit of time in the deserts of Northern California, before I ended up back in Seattle. So, yeah, it was kind of a big circle that kind of started in West Virginia and went kind of up into Massachusetts at one point and then down and back up again. And so,
Huh.
yeah, it was a lot of country, a lot of things, a lot of people. I got to see, I got to drive through cities where there was no traffic, which
Yeah.
was really crazy. I mean, I called my parents are also extensively traveled due to the nature of my dad's job that he recently retired from. And I called my mom and I said, "You'll never believe I just drove through Chicago in 20 minutes. You'll never believe I just drove through Cleveland and there was no one on the road. No,
and
at all.
and
Like
you
it's
must have,
me,
yeah, you must have
yeah.
been, yeah, I know it was the zombie apocalypse, you could go anywhere, but you
Yeah.
must have been masked the whole time too.
Well, I kind of shifted what I did based upon how regulations changed. So first it was no masks, then masks, so that came in. I was at one time I was disinfecting gas pumps at one point or another. When I was in Denver, I formed a huddle with some friends of mine, so we all stayed indoors for 2 weeks. No one got sick. Great. We can hang out. I did outdoor hangouts in people's yards. My one of my mentors in West Virginia, we did a driveway hello where they stood at one end of their driveway, I stood at the other, and we waved hello and talked for a little bit. And I said, "I'm gonna go," and thank you, we'll talk later, sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, lots of that, lots of standing outside of stores waiting to go in.
Yeah.
I mean, there were all sorts of because unlike a lot of other countries, at that time Trump was in office and he left regulations to the states.
Right.
So what the local situation was depended on where
Right.
I was. So
Yeah.
in Massachusetts, lots of regulations, sort of thing. Down in Tennessee, they didn't care.
Yeah.
California, lots of regulation.
Right.
Seattle was a hot spot, lots of regulation. They were doing triage in soccer fields at one point. So it
Huh.
was all so I got to see kind of every flavor of the pandemic sort of
Right.
thing. Um,
Interesting.
yeah, but that staying at that antebellum house kind of got started my brain about doing Sweetgrass Saga, and because then I kind of had that setting, that smell, that wood. I was staying on the third floor, walking up and down the stairs every day, which was its own journey, sort
Yeah.
of thing. Um, was yeah, you get into it. You really get it when you get
And
to go
that's
into
so
these
good as a
places.
writer that you can use all your senses, that you know what it smells like and you know what it sounds like and you know what it feels like. Those details
Yeah.
are gold.
Absolutely. I always tell one of the things I always teach in my writing class, I would try to tell people is if you can engage sense memory, your writing will seem incredibly real. One of the best travel tips I ever got from a dear friend of mine, she said, try to remember how places smell because your brain can recall that.
Yeah.
And so I was when writing, I said, try. It was like not only what are we seeing, what are we feeling, what are we smelling,
Yeah.
what are we touching? Is it smooth? Is it rough? Is it patterned? Is it woven? All these sorts of and that way you can make your adjectives really work
Yeah.
hard,
Yeah.
and also make your writing efficient. Because if you can find the right adjectives to create that sense, all of a sudden your descriptions have weight, they have heft, and you can cut them by 2/3.
And they're original, because
Yes,
you experience them. It's one thing to get something secondhand and then it becomes two-dimensional. But if you
right.
actually experienced it, you attach it to memory and then it's completely you. And the struggle is to find that word that's going to be the perfect word to capture it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. No, I want to get into process a little bit before we go. When are you a hardcore outline planning person, or are you a pantser?
I would, I would say I'm kind of conceptual, that I have
Mm,
an idea of the story, but part of the excitement is discovering it as I go along. So
mm,
I have an idea. I knew I wanted to write Isabel Gunn coming over and, working in the fur trade and ending up meeting in Pembina. I conceived that as a story, but how she was going to do that day to day, what it was going to feel like, what problems she was going to have to overcome, I'm discovering that as I'm writing it. The metaphor I have for myself is I think with my fingers.
mm,
So there's a certain amount. If I knew everything ahead of time at that level of detail, I think it would kill the excitement for me.
mm.
I like the sense of discovery as I'm writing.
No, no, that I always make this joke. I had a recording on Wednesday where I make the joke is that I always ask this question because I'm kind of taking an informal poll of people who come on the show to see who's a planner outliner and who's a bit of a pantser. And pantser wins by a mile, by the
Yes.
way. There are almost 300 episodes of this show. A solid quarter to almost half of them are authors.
Mhm.
And the pantser over the outliners wins by far.
For
Which would
fiction
make
anyway. I can see it being for nonfiction. It would lend itself probably better to the more analytic style, which would be
yeah,
outlining. But for fiction, I mean, the heart of fiction is discovery.
yeah. Yeah, I think I'm kind of the weirdly, I actually am the opposite.
Really.
I assiduously plan fiction. Nonfiction, I have a general idea of what we're going to talk about. I do my research. I'm like, yep, the research goes here, here, and here, and then I just kind of go. Like
Ah,
that's how my crazy autistic brain works. Is I actually do the opposite. With fiction, if I don't have a plan, the wheels kind of fall off the wagon, sort of thing.
that's interesting.
Whereas like with nonfiction, I think because I write much more of it, because I also at the Cameron Journal we cover news and culture and society, and so I put out so much more of that. I think I feel more comfortable, kind of plunking it out. Whereas on fiction, I have my novels, my short story collection, and I have my next book, which is finished, and all this sort of thing. And I think I for some reason I need more of an anchor in fiction because I get lost. I write myself into corners. It kind of turns into a mess, sort of thing.
Hmm.
And so, but I think I think most people are where you are at. I always say I like to outline with a great deal of freedom to change because
Hmm.
sometimes I get ideas or things change around or whatever have you. I also have this new patented thing I do called storyboarding, which I took from film, and it kind of really drills down how to structure a chapter for those that need kind of that level of help sort of thing. But I,
Right.
I do chuckle. It has kind of become a recurring bit about how many people kind of don't assiduously plan like that. And but I also love, and this is where you're new, is I also love how you talk about that a sense of discovery. I think sometimes, in writing as writers, we get really into the is it working, is it good, but all this sort of self-conscious stuff, and not allowing that spirit of discovery to cultivate itself and get enough into the story that it starts to have a life of its own.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. That makes me think of the third book, the most recent one in the 1970s, because I lived through it. It's almost I've been writing that book for 40 years and what it was content trying to find. It's the most autobiographic and spirit book that I will ever write.
Mm,
But you can't just write life. It was a search for structure. So it
mm,
wasn't until I had several novels under my belt that I was experienced enough to be able to find a structure for it. So in that sense, I was thinking far more about form than content by the
mm.
time I figured out how to make that work. So in that way, it lends itself to what you're saying, is that you can get lost in it if you don't sort of pin down where you're going with it as far as what the story demands.
Yeah, yeah, it's and yeah, I also think it sometimes helps if you have multiple storylines going. I have a fantasy project that starts with four storylines that eventually collapses down to two. Um, and there's, to get everything to, it's like an assembly line to merge together at the right moment.
Mhm.
For me, I can't do that without a lot of planning ahead for
Right.
that all to kind of come together so the body meets the drivetrain at the right moment. But I mean, I'm always amazed at the people who can hold all that in their head, sort of thing. That's always quite impressive. However, on a follow-on question though,
Mhm.
what about writing about the 1970s versus the fur trade in the early 19th century was different for you?
Well, they were similar in
Besides the
that,
obvious, like one
yes,
obvious, there's 180
yeah, so,
years between,
yeah,
and telephones and electricity, all the modern conveniences.
yeah. Surprisingly less important than you'd think. But the first two, all three of them were a female going on an adventure, no matter what the world says, kind of story. The
Yeah.
first two were geographic journeys. You know, that's what they were doing that they weren't supposed to. In the 1970s one, it was different because it was more of a safe, social sort of thing that she was doing something whether her world wanted her to or not. And it was also I did not have to research the history of that time because I lived it through. So it made it a more sensual experience of history. For example, in Canada in 1968, they changed the Divorce Act. So there was a pent up desire for a whole lot of divorce that went on through the 1970s. So it was a very disrupted time socially. It was tumultuous. And so this
Here
is
as well, no fault divorce comes through in the early 70s.
absolutely.
Ironically, first pioneered by Ronald Reagan. People forget about that in California all the time. But yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yes, that you could just say marital breakdown rather than having to hire a private detective and prove some nefarious activity.
Right.
But it had a big influence on the experience of life during that time. So my protagonist comes into adulthood during those times that her family does fall apart, and she ends up having choosing the the quintessential villain of the time, which was the long-haired hippie who didn't have a job, and all
Mm.
hell would rain down on you if you chose that. So the experience of that was also overlaid by the 70s was a very exciting time for women because they ended up having a whole lot more freedom and autonomy than they ever did before. They could go into jobs they could never go into before. They went to post-secondary education in droves. Women went out to work and had their own money and that sort of thing that they didn't before. You had the pill came to be widespread available at the time,
Could get
and
a
in
bank
can
account, could get a credit card. Wasn't a thing
exactly.
before. Yeah.
That's right. And in Canada, we had the whole sort of drama of Henry Morgentaler, who was the doctor who brought the nation to its knees over the issue of abortion.
Mm.
And Canada is now the only Western country that does not have an abortion law. we're unique in that way. And he was the one who took it all the way to the Supreme Court and had it knocked down. So all of those things, and it was the Helen Reddy, I am woman, hear me roar kind of time. Your mother would totally relate to this.
My mom graduated high school in 1974. She was on my mind as you were talking about all this.
Yes,
Absolutely.
yes, we are of the same generation. So
yes.
they were heady times. They were exciting. And the second wave women's movement at the time was very different from what it is now. It was much more, I will take my risks, just get out of my way. Yeah. That was the whole thing. You don't have to take care of me. I'm a big girl. I can take care of myself. Just get out of my way and let me go and figure out my own life. So that makes for a lot of excitement.
Absolutely. I was also mindful there was a woman in my MFA program who I can think of her face, can't think of her name right now. I'll have to find her and shoot her a text to remind her to watch this when it comes out. I absolutely loved her because, one, I absolutely love my senior lesbians. They're the most amazing people ever. And two, her book during the MFA that she was working on was her experiences in California driving women to have abortions in the 70s. And there's one line from that always stood out to me. She said, "It was important work, and we understood that we did not have to be friends in order to do this important work."
And it was women
that
helping
knocked
women.
Me on my it's still, even just telling it to you now, I'm still processing the gravity of that. It's been 2 years and I'm still just kind of like, I need some more time to get through the gravity and the importance of all that. But it was just amazing to meet someone on the ground who went through that and lived that and was helpful and involved. Just kind of like, especially you might have noticed our countries were going backwards on that subject. And so as some, but to be kind of like, I think people forget, like, there are people still alive who lived through this. This seems long time ago. It wasn't. They're still very much alive.
And it feels like yesterday. Well, I was one of a few women who set up, it was a university club at the time called Women in Crisis. And we were one of those young feminists running around in the 70s, setting up rape crisis centers and shelters for victims of domestic violence. And so you're reminding me of, we did not have a shelter in Guelph at that time. And so we would drive women to shelters in other towns and cities. And go into their house, help them pack their stuff, get them into the car, and just drive them in our own cars, at our own expense, to go and help them get out of a dangerous situation. So, that was part of the excitement too, is that you could actually change something. You could actually be part of making things better for other women. And there was a real sense of camaraderie at the time that women could help women.
Yeah, no, it's, and I think, especially for my primarily American audience, although we do have many listeners and watchers in Canada, sort of thing, it's, for me, I always enjoy hearing about what it was like in other places, going through the same things at similar times and all this type of thing.
The 70s were really a North American thing.
Yes. Well, yes. I mean, not that Europe slouched. You can go watch the Beider Meinhof Collective about the riots in Germany in the 70s. That was all sort of thing. But I just, all the things that in common, these common stories, sort of thing, were quite exciting. But it was, and there was a lot of energy, especially, we were doing the Vietnam protests down here and all this sort of thing.
But we were getting the draft dodgers.
Yes, and we're coming to get, which Carter had later partners. But yes, so our fortunes are just inextricably linked. Yes, which makes some of the recent comments by certain politicians all the more troubling. But that's a subject for another podcast. Yes, absolutely fascinating and just amazing. Well, we're almost at time, so. Let me do this. Let us know where we can keep up with you online, find you on social media, and where we can purchase these amazing books that we've talked about.
Well, if you Google my name, Cinda Gault, you will be led to my website, cindagault.com, and you can get all kinds of information on my work there. And you can get any of those books at Amazon. Just put my name in and they will come in. My publisher is Grey Goose Press in Red Deer, Alberta, which would have been not that far off from where you were. And you can buy directly from them, greygoosepress.com, but they're also at Amazon.
Excellent. Amazing. Well, Cinda, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your stories and taking us into a little slice of our northern neighbor.
Well, it's been my pleasure, and it's been a pleasure meeting you too.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
That's all for this episode of the Cameron Journal podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Visit us online at CameronJournal.com. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and I love to talk to my followers and listeners, so please feel free to get us on social media at Cameron Cowan on Twitter, and we'll see you next time on the Cameron Journal podcast.